This is Banjo, and today I'm going over the ramp start procedure for the JA-37 Viggen found in Falcon BMS v 4.33. Once in cockpit, the first step we'll do is close the canopy, which we could do by left-clicking on the canopy release lever located on the left sidewall of the cockpit. With the canopy closed, the next step will be to enable main power, which we could find as a toggle switch labeled generator on the throttle quadrant. Left-clicking the switch will cycle to battery, left-clicking again will cycle to main power. Next, I'll enable the parking brake with the lower switch on the central pedestal. Finally, I'll move over to the right wall console and set the air source and enable the fuel pump. At this point, the engine's ready for startup, so we'll move back over to the throttle quadrant, and we'll toggle jet fuel start, which is labeled as start, over to the left of the battery toggle switch. At this point, the engine will run itself up to 20% RPM and hold there until you hit the idle cutoff, at which point the engine will continue spooling till the generators come online, supplying power to the rest of the avionics. To accomplish this, we'll move the throttle out of idle to about 50%, then we'll hit the button labeled ID, which is the idle detent, which I'm hovering my cursor over currently, and then we'll return the throttle to idle. This will all happen at 20% RPM, which the engine is yet to reach, so we'll skip ahead. At this point, we can see the engine sitting at 20% RPM, so it's at this point that I'll move the throttle past idle to about 50%. I'll click on the idle detent and return the throttle to idle, and we can see the RPM increasing. So at this point, we simply wait until the engine RPM stabilizes and the generators can come online. Once the generators are online, we can move on from engine startup to setting up the rest of the aircraft systems. At this point, we'll move over to the right console and enable external lighting. As usual, these consist of the anti-collision lights, flash steady, wings tail, formation lights, and the external lights master power. Next, we'll move up the console to enable power to our avionics. We'll start with FCR, left hardpoint, right hardpoint power, GPS, UFC, MFD, data link, SMS, and FCC. Next, we'll start the INS alignment by moving the INS knob into calibration, or align, with INS alignment status being displayed on the lower section of the central MFD. As this will take a moment to display, we'll simply skip ahead. The INS alignment will complete once 4 minutes have passed and it reads 4.0.0.8. In the meantime, I'll go over a few more of the systems and we'll set up the rest of the systems which we still need to set up. Depending on the time of day, you may wish to enable instrument lighting or internal flood lighting, which we could find on the back of the left console. You should also note the location of the autopilot control panel, with roll on the left, pitch as the right toggle, and autopilot disconnect as the central. Just to the right of this, we have our countermeasure control panel, with chaff and flare, which should be enabled, and ECM power, which you should enable if you're carrying the jammer pod. Next is the volume control panel. From left to right, we have COM 1, missile, COM 2, and thread volume. Just up from here is the radio control panel. The 3 push buttons on the left are UHF mode, BAS being manual, NR being preset, MHZ being guard. The toggle switch is UHF function, central being off, right main, and left both. Current preset is displayed on the display window, which is currently reading 06. Next, we'll move on to power the HUD, which we can do by selecting the left rotary found underneath the HUD, just above the central MFD. Power to the radar warning receiver can be supplied with the RWR power button located on the upper left of the right MFD. Simply right-click this to enable it. Next, we'll clear up some faults on the warning and advisories panel by left-clicking the FAC button twice, which is located on the lower left of the UFC, below the central MFD. Moving over to the right console, you may wish to note emergency jettison, master arm, and laser arm toggle. Though the next thing to set up on the right console is our EWS mode, which we could find as a rotary further down the panel. Here we can see that it's defaulted to off, which point it switches to semi, then manual, then automatic. In this case, I have it in manual, the right knob being currently selected program. The last thing you'll need to set up on the right console is to move the CNI selector from backup to UHF to enable the use of your radios. Though it's on the same panel that you can set up TACAN if you wish, with TACAN mode being the toggle switch and the drums being TACAN channel. Fuel display can be managed on the panel just below the warning and advisories panel, with the rotary knob selecting the mode itself, while the mode selected is displayed on the push buttons above. And finally, as we glance at the warning and advisories panel, we can see 2 lights are left illuminated. These are the parking brake, which we enabled earlier, and the ejection seat, which we have yet to enable. If we glance over our right shoulder, we can see the lever used to arm the ejection seat, we'd see as the cursor goes green over the center of it, and if we left click, this arms it, removing the light from the warning and advisories panel. If we wish to disarm it, we could see over our left shoulder the area that we need to click as the cursor goes green, and the light re-enables itself on the warning and advisories panel. So at this point, I'm waiting on the final stages of INS alignment, which will happen momentarily. So as a final step, we'll move over to the right MFD, and we'll select DTE, and we'll select load off the upper central OSB to load the data cartridge. At this point, we'll simply skip ahead until the INS alignment finishes up. Now at this point, we can see INS alignment is finished. We can see ready flashing on the DED. We can see a line flashing on the HUD. So we'll once again left-click the INS mode to move it from align to nav. Now at this point, on the radar, we'll simply select our radar mode of operation, which in this case, being an air-to-air fighter, will most likely be CRM. And while I'm at it, I'll also host the interflight data link by selecting align and holding comm switch left for a moment. At this point, everything's set up and we're ready to taxi out, so we'll enable our nose wheel steering, indicated by the illuminator on the left advisory panel. There's no toggle switch for this in Cockpit, so you'll need to have a key binding for it. At this point, we'll call the tower to remove chocks and roll out.